One. Yeah, I hear you, Zoom. This meeting is being recorded, and we are. Wait, are we recording? Now we're recording. Yes, and of course that's the new Zoom thing. Tells everybody they're being recorded. If they're 450 episodes late, doesn't matter anymore. Episode 460, with of course longtime returner Aaron Shepard, my buddy. But enough of Aaron, enough of me. You guys have heard me enough, and you've heard Aaron enough.
Mm-hmm.
Returning for a second time is Dr. Lawrence Burns, author of Autonomy, but I also, as I just said, want to give you a proper introduction so people know just how impressive your background is. So I am going to fanboy for a second. Lawrence D. Burns is the former corporate vice president of research and development for General Motors. Burns oversaw GM's advanced technology, innovation programs, and corporate strategy. He was a member of GM's Automotive Strategy Board and Automotive Product Board. Within GM, he personally championed vehicle electrification, connected vehicles, fuel cells, biofuels, advanced batteries, autonomous driving, and a series of innovative concept vehicles. He has been a leading advocate for design and technology innovation focused on the total custom experience and the application of operations research before his retirement in 2009, and of course, the author of Autonomy, The Quest to Build the Driverless Car. You could say a little more. You have a little more on your CV than Aaron and I combined, just a tad. But
In 30 years, probably.
hey, you know
But
what? Hey,
you know what? I'm probably older than the two of you combined too. So there's that explains it.
hey, you know what? Hey, okay, fair enough. I wanted to go into this, and I emailed you, and I listened to your book several times over again because, as everyone that listens to this podcast knows, that's kind of my habit. I find a book I like, and I just kind of beat it to death. And I decided who better to ask, because I can go online and what's coming down the pipeline. If you go to like Google and start typing in Apple, Mac, it'll finish it for you. Rumors. Okay, that's fine. But I figured I had a direct line of contact with you, so instead of going down and finding what other people may want me to see or PR or hype, I decided why not get the man himself. So, Dr. Burns, what do you see coming down the pipeline with autonomous cars?
That's a great question because in some ways we're in the infancy of autonomous cars, but in other ways people think we've been working on them forever. Just a real quick timeline. In the early 2000s, when the Middle East wars were breaking out, we obviously had our soldiers in harm's way, and we had these vehicles being blown up by these IEDs, and our soldiers were getting maimed and killed. And the military urgently needed a solution, and so they went about a number of pathways. One was to create an autonomous vehicle that could do missions in cities without any personnel in them, keep our people out of harm's way, but accomplish the mission. So the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, took that on and they created 3 autonomous vehicle challenges. The first 2 were in the desert, and the third one was the DARPA Urban Challenge. That third one was the one I participated in as head of R&D at GM. We sponsored Carnegie Mellon University, and that took place in November 2007. And we won the race, got the prize. And the head of DARPA, a guy named Tony Tether, I asked him, when's our next race? And he said, there's no need for any
Mm-hmm.
more races. You guys have proven this is possible.
Oh,
So it's
wow.
the private sector to step up and do something about it. So, that was 13 and a half years ago. And here we are, we still don't have these vehicles commercialized. So is this a glass half empty or a glass half full kind of question? Well, an engineer would say the glass is twice as big as it needs to be.
Yeah, yeah.
The fact is that I would say it's more than a glass half full. This problem of perfecting an autonomous driving system on everyday roads under a wide range of conditions, I think has proven to be tougher than most of the pioneers anticipated. We all thought it was going to be tough, but we thought we could systematically knock off every challenge and have something commercialized by now.
Mm-hmm.
We do have some commercialization. Waymo, which I advised for 10 years, is running commercial operations in Chandler, Arizona. Some people would say, it's a suburb, it's flat, it's nice weather, it's kind of cherry picking some easy conditions. It's not nearly as hard as San Francisco
Mm-hmm.
or Detroit in the winter, let's say. So we've made great progress, but there's still more to be done. And I think the real opportunity going forward is to find these, what we call use cases, these ways of taking what we know how to do today and extract their commercial value now. So let's say hypothetically you're in a car, and it has two kinds of systems integrated into it, really three. There's you as the driver, you can drive it as you normally do. There's advanced driver assistance systems. Those are things called emergency braking, lane keeping, forward collision warning, full speed adaptive cruise control. Those are things that take some of your driving workload away. GM calls that super cruise. Tesla would call that autopilot, for example. So you've got those assists in your car, and then you have another thing, you've got a fully autonomous driving capability. And I think the blending of those together are what's going to get this thing really moving. It turns out about 80 to 85% of the miles Americans drive are people in their personally owned cars. Some of the early interest in what I wrote about in the book was more of a Uber without a driver. It was a ride hailing system. And if you could automate that, you could really do something for urban areas. I think what we're seeing going forward now is the auto companies have definitely gotten in the mix. The tech companies were way out ahead. This is taking longer than we thought. So we thought maybe it was going to be a 20-mile run, and now maybe it's a 40-mile run. And the tech companies are still ahead, but the auto companies have closed that gap quite a bit. And the auto companies want to sell Tommy and Aaron a car. They don't want to do ride hailing. They want to sell you two guys a car. And they would like to sell you a car down the road that's autonomous. It's not quite ready, but they could sell you a car that has these advanced driver assistance systems and some autonomous capability. So let's say you're driving down Interstate 80 on a clear day on a straight stretch with a little bit of traffic. Maybe they can say, Tommy, you can take a nap now, because I know from my data, my experience, that this stretch up the road, I'm anticipating it is something I can handle better than you. So go ahead and nap. I'll wake you up when I get to a future stretch where I might need you. Okay, so you begin to harvest this value, and maybe 2 months later, I can, rather than take you on a 30-mile stretch of I-80, I can take you 35 miles. 2 months later, maybe I take you 40. And eventually, I'm taking you most of your miles. I think this is going to be how it plays out. And if you really look at, study and connect the dots at what GM has said publicly, what Tesla has said publicly, what Ford has said publicly, what Volkswagen has said publicly, and even what Toyota has said publicly, I think that's where the auto companies are headed, a systematic integration of advanced driver assistance systems, where you still have to pay attention, with ever increasingly capable autonomous driving. So in GM's case, it would be Super Cruise plus Cruise, which they own. In Tesla's case, it would basically be autopilot, but eventually Elon's going to whisper in your ear. They're going to say, Aaron, I've got your back for the next 30 miles. Relax. I know, because I've got other Teslas up the road, that the coefficient of friction on this entire stretch is really big, and I can stop safely. I've got data. I've driven this with other customers so many different times. I know under these conditions, there's nothing to worry about. And you're going to say, that's great, because you're going to want to be able to fully get yourself out of the loop for a while. I think that's how it's going to play out. And similarly with over-the-road trucking, I think you're going to see goods movement mature with autonomous driving faster than people movement. Why is that? Well, first of all, you don't have to protect an occupant in an autonomous truck, but you do with an autonomous vehicle for riding around. Secondly, that truck can follow a predefined safest route. So that truck doesn't need to go by the school, because there's kids around. They can go around the school farther away and not worry about places where there might be kids. And so what if that package got to your door 5 minutes later than it would have if they took the most direct route? And then, most importantly for goods movement, the business case is crystal clear. I know how much truck drivers make. I know how much FedEx and UPS drivers make, and Amazon Prime drivers. And so if you can automate parts of their tasks, the payback is really clear. Whereas with autonomous cars that you own yourself, how much do you value your time not having to drive? It's kind of hard to put that value proposition together. So goods movement will move before people movement. Goods movement will take this incremental step-by-step approach. You may have two trucks going down Interstate 80. The lead one might have a driver. The following one might not have a driver. Or the lead one truck and the lead one with a driver, but that driver is able to operate 15 hours a day because 6 of those hours he really wasn't needed because the driving system handled it. So there's all kinds of ways to harvest this value before we've perfected it.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, perfect is the enemy of good enough.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
If you're waiting to commercialize until you're perfect and you can do everything that humans can do, that might be too long of a wait for some of the investors. So I think you're going to see this integration of what we call ADAS with fully level 4 driving. And I think you're going to see the auto companies try to harvest that value proposition as they go forward.
That was a brilliant answer.
It's a long one. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely not.
It was awesome. Yeah.
My audience has hours and hours of Aaron and I's worthless rambling. Trust me,
Yes.
they're here to listen to you. Aaron and I are just the spectators.
Oh, yes.
It does, and I think it's interesting with what Aaron does with Cogito Brains and Dr. Burns, what you spoke about with DARPA, is I would say, despite the many advantages of a capitalist and mostly open society, there's one drawback, and it's the long-term goal that unless we can define it in quarterly profits, we probably won't get it done. And that's where things, most notably DARPA, has, well, aside from classified defense projects.
Absolutely. If you go back and you look at the history of DARPA,
Yeah.
what happened in the Eisenhower administration, it
Uh-huh.
was to solve that exact kind of challenge. And
Yeah.
they've done a great job.
Yeah.
The things you can trace back to DARPA that are impacting our lives today is just phenomenal. So they've done a nice job of that.
And I think it's interesting with Aaron. Aaron, could you give Dr. Burns a brief overview of what you do? Because I think there is an interesting parallel with Dr. Burns. What you spoke about was 20 years ago, and they're pushing the challenges, and then when's the next race? We don't need to. You did it. And now it's kind of becoming a little more mature. Like my older brother has a Tesla, and I see them, and here I am talking to you, Dr. Burns, and it's still not entirely here, but it feels like it's coming. And you can see this sort of almost Overton window of accepted technology to where now it's like, yes, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to forget because we can always look back in hindsight. We can look back and say, well, we got to remember when the idea of autonomous cars first came around, everyone was, what is that? That is not what we do. And I think it's beautiful to have Aaron here because we can kind of slip on those slippers of yesteryear, because with what Aaron does and mind controlled robotics, that is, it's right. Well, the face you just made, Dr. Burns, is we're kind of instantly back in 2001. It's like whoa, what are you what when's Skynet coming on? But it's that
my wife perfected that technology years ago.
Mm-hmm.
To get me to behave like a robot.
Hey, well, okay, or fair enough. All right, podcast over. There we go. We solved it.
But mine too. Yeah, and
you
it took her no time either.
You guys aren't convincing me that marriage is where I need to head. It's
absolutely worth it. But
yeah, Aaron, could you give Dr. Burns a quick overview of what you do?
Yes.
With Cogito Brains?
Yes. So like Tommy said, I focus on using brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, and we create devices that respond to your thoughts. And we are talking about a bunch of different applications, including using this as a therapeutic tool, using this to help people that are paraplegic. And then, it's just really, really cool to think, oh, I want to do something. And then, you want to, it's like you're in Star Wars and you want to control the robot with your mind, and you think, hey, move, and it moves. And honestly, I feel like it is, like Tommy said, one of the challenges that we face is that when you explain the technology, it is so out there and it is so sci-fi that people are almost repelled by it. They're like, wait, what? I don't want the robots to read my mind. I don't want to create Skynet. And it's interesting, the parallel the parallels between the technology that we're developing and what you face with autonomous cars. Because I imagine, and one question I do want to ask is, as you're pushing for innovation in that field, how much convincing have you had to do of people that this is
Yeah.
reliable and safe?
Well, there's no amount of PowerPoint convincing you can do to have someone believe you that a car can drive itself. The best way to get someone to believe a car that can drive itself is to have them ride in a car that's driving itself.
Mhm.
And that's really the key. And that's why some of these first movers, um, when they're able to bring someone out to their location and let them get in a car, let's say in Chandler, Arizona or something, and take a ride, suddenly their view on the technology changes dramatically. They really begin to get it. And I think on the last podcast, Tommy, I talked about my first experience riding on something other than a test track or a secured track in an autonomous car. And it's when I went and joined Google self-driving cars to be an advisor, and I went for a ride on 101 for the first time. So this would have been early 2011, late 2010, and it was a Prius, and I rode it out. I drove it out to 101. I had a engineer in the front passenger seat, an engineer in the back seat, a big red panic button in the console. And they said, "Okay, get in the center lane of 101 and engage it. Take your hands off the wheels, take your feet off the pedals, and sit back and enjoy the ride." And at first you're kind of nervous. Your hands are shaking, your feet are shaking a bit, and you're making sure you know where that red button is. About 5 minutes later, you start to understand this car is doing what I would be doing if I was driving, but it's doing better. It's got 360-degree vision with
Mm-hmm.
eyes in the back of your head, kind of a thing. Doesn't get distracted, doesn't get impaired, and it makes intuitive moves. This is 2010, late 2010. So I think, Aaron, the key, like you said, if I could go to your lab and you could equip me to think and say, think about a robot moving and the robot move, you've got me. I mean, that's exactly, and engineers sometimes call that full-time or full-scale rapid prototyping. Prototype something fast and do a learning cycle off of it, break it, and then go to your next lesson and keep going. Engineers make what's possible real through learning, and learning is the foundation of innovation in my mind. And a lot of people learn differently and they comprehend differently. In my career, I never once thought about giving up an idea until I have had at least 4 attempts to help someone understand what I'm talking about. So being a senior executive in a large corporation in charge of innovation, I'd go to our strategy board meetings. I put an idea on the table. These were the 13 top people in GM, and my 12 peers would say, nah, nah, nah. Maybe the 4th time, 3 of them would say, maybe there's something there. So
Mm-hmm.
you need a lot of tenacity. Never, ever, ever give up if you think this thing is possible and it's going to work. The other thing that's really important to understand is people listen differently and learn differently. There was a really neat study done by SIRI International, it's a research institute. They were asked to study how 7th graders learn algebra. And you can learn algebra by learning the equation y equals ax plus b. Or you could do a graph of the values of y versus values of x, or a table of the values of y, bar chart versus x. Or you could maybe have a car move down at a certain speed and show how far the car went as a function of time or something like that. And when they let the kids pick which way they like to learn, they sort of spread uniformly over those 4 ways, but everybody's performance improved
Okay.
because they were learning algebra using the mental model or the way that they can comprehend it. So I think the key to keep your investors motivated and to get people believing in what you're working on is to show them, but to show them in different ways and to really let them experience it. And I think that's absolutely essential.
Wow.
And it's like what you said in your book about, and it's like, tap on the gas, tap on. He was like, no, punch it, and he rammed into it and destroyed the bumper. And it was like, but that's how you learn, is by defining the boundaries
Oh, yeah.
of what you can do.
Mhm.
I've emailed former presidents to come on my podcast and got a firm no. And I understand. I'm like, okay, I'm not at presidential level yet. We'll take it down a notch. And but there is that, but to pivot, there's one video Aaron showed me, and it's of him, and I mean, he looks like a mad scientist, and he's got the electrodes on his mind, and it's using a beta or theta brain waves. It's Aaron's too smart for me, but it's what it is it's an electromagnet. And when he thinks, or when you think about something, or whatever the action is that you do with your mind, the corresponding physical reaction is the electromagnet turns on and it picks up like a washer, and then he
Hmm.
stops and it drops. And I remember I was so blown away by that, and other people didn't understand why I was blown away by it, because yes, although it's like you in 2010, it's kind of Wilbur and Orville Wright. It's like, all right, whatever. They flew 120 feet. It's what I told Aaron is the implications of that. The
Yeah,
implications of the Wright flyer imply Air Force One.
Hmm.
And the implications of that is, I believe, what implies when you have your car and it's okay, it sees the dust cloud during the DARPA challenge, or it goes around this. At first, it may look like 2001: A Space Odyssey. It may look like he's picking up the club, and it's what that implies though is that we're now using tools. It's an entire new epoch of humanity,
yeah.
and yeah, is that what you find you have experiences with, Dr. Burns? Do you have to see that original thing that maybe other, like Aaron, like a mad scientist in his garage with a washer, do you have to look for the implications and be able to extrapolate from Orville Wright to a 747? Is that
Yeah,
what you need?
yeah. I think there's a lesson in this. It's called think big, start small, and learn fast
Okay.
so you can scale smart. So I think you
Hmm.
have to think big. If you take what Aaron's talking about and you really think big, what's possible if you can use your mind to control robots? I mean, that's a huge,
Oh,
big opportunity, the way that that's going to transform people's lives. And it's not, and absolutely, this is going to be great for people with disabilities. And by the way, I hear with cochlear implants.
mhm.
You have read about that in my book.
Yes, sir.
And that happened because there was a doctor in Australia named Graham Clark in the 70s who believed that he could stimulate an auditory nerve with an electrode. No one believed him. He almost went bankrupt with his personal wealth to even try it. Finally, he was able to implant one electrode in one deaf man's ear, and that deaf man could sense or hear sound. He would know something happened. I have 22 electrodes in each ear. So we've gone from one electrode to 22. We've got better batteries. We've got better software,
Hmm.
got better microphones. And when I had my second ear implanted in 2011, my first ear in 94, I went from not being able to understand music to now being able to enjoy the music I grew up with. ZZ Top and the Doors and the Rolling Stones and those kinds of groups. And I love them. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. But if a new entertainer came along, Adele, I can't really appreciate Adele's music. Maybe I don't want to. I don't know. Maybe I should. But that's the mind, Aaron. I'm sure you've gotten into that in a big way. I read a book about healing in the mind, and my mind, I think, actually rewired itself.
Sure.
So that the input that came from those electrical stimuli on my auditory nerve, you've got 30,000 hairs that wiggle back and forth and stimulate your auditory nerve. I've got 22 electrodes. So it didn't make any sense initially. I think my brain rewired itself somehow to understand those sounds as because I could relate it to the environment.
Hmm.
Absolutely.
That
Yes.
step that Professor Clark took in the 70s was like an override moment, or like your robot picking up a washer and making it possible. If there's a market for it, the engineers and marketers will figure a way to get this stuff to mature. It's
Yeah.
usually
And so one question that I have is, when because you obviously work in innovation, and when you work in innovation, you are inherently forward thinking. However, the rest of the world is not. And so how do you manage the two? Because like if you're directing innovation at GM and you have this idea, how do you go through the process of like trying to stay ahead, but then also keeping the people that need to be satisfied in this moment
The
satisfied? Like,
investors.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think communication is extraordinarily important part of that. And if you're a leader of an innovation organization or of a startup company, you really have to be very, very good at communicating.
Mhm.
That's fascinating because I've been on advisory boards of venture capital funds and stuff or in the second career after I left GM. And I've looked at hundreds, if not thousands, of startups. And oftentimes the startup was because of a technically brilliant or marketing brilliant individual. And as these companies start to make progress, they've got to go out and raise money and they've got to motivate investors. That person's skill set may not have been to be a great communicator. That's not a criticism. It's just not what got the idea started. And a lot of times these startups don't make it over the goal line because they can't pivot to the kind of leadership that they need to keep everyone motivated. It's not just the investor, it's the employees and
Mhm.
others that you have to have continued to believe in what's possible. And so it's a tall order. And by the way, not everything works out. I do think sometimes there's a media image of the young innovator who became a billionaire because he had an idea. So everyone wants to go out and be an entrepreneur and do a startup. I would say out of 1,000 startups, one of them gets to a point where the founders really became financially successful. It is a hard journey. It takes great tenacity, great energy, great passion and commitment and belief in what you're doing. But when you get it right, the rewards can't be greater. They're just it's so stimulating. For me, it's not the money. I mean, being financially rewarded is fine.
Sure.
It's looking
Mhm.
back and seeing your fingerprints on the world.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that's what every engineer aspires to do is leave their fingerprints behind, having created something that made a meaningful difference in the lives of people is pretty nice feeling. That's what's motivating, I think, for us engineers.
Mhm.
Well, absolutely. I thought kind of just thought about what you just said. Yeah, the romantic idea of he had an idea and he pursued it and now he's a billionaire. And it makes me think of in World War II, parallel to the construction of the atomic bomb was a plan to put incendiary bombs, like a couple grams, and we were going to tie them to bats, and we were going to drop the bats over Tokyo, and they were going to go hide under dark crevices under buildings, and then they'd all explode and burn Tokyo to the ground. It didn't work because the bats burned down the testing ground. So we all know about the A bomb, and we go, "Hey, that won the war." And there's some scientists that are known for the bat thing, or rather, they are not known for the bat thing. So it might be the A bomb, it might be a bat. It doesn't always work out.
No,
Um,
it doesn't. Tommy, you can't anticipate all of these things.
yeah,
So people will talk about the unanticipated consequences. I like to talk about the anticipated consequences in terms of autonomous electric vehicles. And what are those anticipated consequences? We've got 1.2 to 1.3 million people a year dying on the world's roadways, and we're going to eliminate 90 to 95% of those crashes. That's an anticipated consequence, not an unanticipated one. We're going to be able to get the dependence of transportation off of oil. And the auto companies are pivoting to electric vehicles, not because they suddenly found religion on climate change. They're pivoting there because Einstein said the best design is the simplest one that works. And now that we've got batteries that are viable for our transportation needs, battery electric vehicle is radically simpler than a combustion based mechanically driven vehicle. So, this whole anticipated consequence of being able to get off of oil for geopolitical purposes is a big deal. The anticipated consequence of people who can't afford a car or can't physically drive a car now suddenly have access to jobs and education and shopping the way that people who have cars have it. The cycles of poverty in many cities are directly tied to the lack of transportation that people have. So the pile of anticipated consequences associated with autonomous electric vehicles is so big that the risks of the unanticipated um, shouldn't get in the way. And so,
Mhm.
and I'm not saying you're suggesting this at all, Tommy, by your question, but when I'm out on giving my speeches, I get a little bit frustrated by the yeah, but audience saying, well, yeah, but you might not be able to do this in the snow or something like that. Or we're going to have jobs impacted. We're going to have jobs impacted on no matter what happens here going forward.
yeah.
So I think you got to really passionately go after the anticipated consequences, learn about the unanticipated, manage those in a responsible way, and then get on with it.
Yeah. 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 I mean, the analogy that's always used is we didn't prevent the creation of cars because what would happen to the horse and buggy industry. It's like it evolved. You can't you'll be stagnant forever.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
we Aaron.
No, I was going to say you also have to evolve with it because as somebody who works a lot in robotics, and when I talk to people about that, they're like, "Oh, well, the robots are going to take our jobs," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but then they'll create a whole bunch more." It's the same thing as the computer, where the computer replaced, it made a whole bunch of jobs obsolete, but then it created an exponential amount more. And
Absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely. I think where it's a little tough right now is people can't quite see those jobs the way they may have been able to see them in the early 1900s. You know, this period of time from 1880 to 1920 is fascinating because it really defined the technologies that I experienced growing up. So you're talking about cars and planes and trains and radios and TVs and those kinds of things were the things that my parents in the 1950s, I was born in 51, those were the things they aspired to own and then obviously shaped me considerably as I grew up. And so I think you're going to look back in history from 1990 to 2020 and you're going to say similarly. And it's all of this stuff around robotics, around digital technology, around material science, because I'm sure there's things happening in material science that are going to make it easier to commercialize what you're doing with uh, your thoughts being able to control a robot. And the stuff going on at the nanoscale with materials is stunning.
Mhm.
So the question isn't whether we should pursue these opportunities, because I do think they're going to make the world a better place. It's who's going to win and who's going to lose. That's one of the reasons why I wrote Autonomy, is I wanted people to understand this is coming. It appears inevitable. And if you're one that's going to be disruptive, you better get in front of that and get yourself positioned for the new skills and the new jobs that are going to emerge from this future. There's a lot of jobs at Amazon right now because e-commerce came along and disrupted retail shopping. So should we not have embraced e-commerce because someone who is a salesperson in a Sixth Avenue at a mall may no longer have that job? I don't think so. I think it's motivated the retail players to innovate,
Mhm.
which is a good thing. So innovation is really, really a powerful force. And
Well,
combined with capitalism, I'm Tom, you were alluding to
Mhm.
that earlier. There has to be a motivation for doing it.
sure. I think
Mhm.
it's well, kind of what you said earlier, the anticipated and the unanticipated. What was the unanticipated? You know, well, we'll never live to see a pandemic. And now there's e-commerce and thank God, right? It's like, oh wow. I mean, imagine if we had to do an Operation Warp Speed with e-commerce though. Like no, the infrastructure was already there. The warehouses were there. The mega corporation Amazon already existed. Like
Yeah,
it just kind of picked it up pretty seamlessly.
yeah, yeah, really. Really.
Mhm.
Um if we could skip to the last question. Unless you have any specific questions.
I do have a question, but if
Sure,
you want
take
to
it. No,
stay,
no, take it, take it.
Yeah,
I guess, and again, because like you, I'm an engineer, and I like in most engineers or entrepreneurs, Tommy, for example, we just see the world differently, and I feel like I don't know if I'm being repetitive, but I think one of the challenges is how do you breed a culture that is accepting of innovation in the spaces that you're operating in? Because like for innovation to take place, you need time, you need money, you need
too.
uh, things that people just don't want to give, especially in this age where everybody's expecting things to be instantaneous.
Yeah,
How do you breed that culture now?
yeah, yeah. Again, I think a whole lot of it is to start with the end in mind and work backwards.
Mhm.
Sometimes that proves to be a very, very good technique. So it's again, it's a communication strategy. There's a writer named Russ Akoff who came up with that thought process. So imagine you need to climb a mountain, and you could envision that challenge by starting at the bottom, taking your first step, and then figuring out your next step. Every time you take your first and next step, you're dealing with a lot of ambiguity. You're wondering, is this route going to take me to the top of the mountain? Another way to think it through is start at the top of the mountain and work backwards and say, I've arrived. And now, what was the last step I took that got me here? And the second to the last step, and the third to the last step. Sometimes that will give you a way of defining your path forward, because you still have to bring that back down to the bottom of the mountain and work your way up. So it's not a matter of being done with that. So I think that visualization is very, very important. Being able to do the storytelling around that, being able to do animations. There's a lot of visualization tools today that didn't exist when I was younger that will help people grasp it. The other real key thing is to focus on making value, not just making things. And
Sure.
value creation happens. You've got value made when it exceeds the price people are willing to pay. Then they're going to want it. If the value exceeds the price people are willing to pay, they're going to want it. And if the price exceeds the cost to make it, you're going to want to produce it. So I call that a tipping point.
Mhm.
I think it's real important, Aaron, in your business for your commercialization of your product. What is that market tipping point where you can see a Gen 2 or Gen 3 product? Don't get fixated on Gen 1 products being profitable. That's just not going to happen. You need
Mhm.
2, 3, 4 learning cycles with real customers to create supply bases and get all of this stuff done. But somehow you have to get your investors to understand that there is a tipping point. It's within a reasonable amount of time, and that even though it's not the perfect answer that's the top of the mountain, it's a very meaningful commercialization that is taking me along a path of value creation.
Mhm.
So I think the value has to be there for the consumer, obviously, but also for the shareholder. It all has to be there.
Mhm.
It's well, yeah. That's a brilliant way to look. Yeah, it's not going to be the first one that works. You
Mhm.
gotta.
Yeah, but the first one has to be good enough to give you a chance to do
Sure.
the second one.
Yeah,
So
sure.
take,
Proof of
take
concept.
anti-lock brakes, which was amazing. When I learned to drive, one of the things they taught me in driver's training is if you got on some ice, pump the brakes, all that stuff. Well, that's totally obsolete now. The first anti-lock brakes that GM developed was sold as an option on one Cadillac model.
Mhm.
So that was ABS 1. It wasn't until ABS 6 that the technology had matured to the point where we were putting it on lower price Chevrolets across the board.
Mhm.
So that took 6 generations of technology development to go from an option on one Cadillac model to a standard on all cars. And so that's what happens with learning. You learn, and a lot of these things you need a competitive supply base. If you're just using prototype parts, I'm sure that mechanism you put on your head to send your brain waves, Aaron, probably has a lot of specialized prototype parts that are one of the kind and pretty expensive to cobble all that together. But at someday you're going to envision a production design for that. And you're
Mhm.
going to get 3 or 4 suppliers competing for your business because this is something people want, and then you're going to deliver the value and the quality at a price that allows it to scale. So engineering isn't just the technical part of our job. You do need to understand value propositions. You need to understand some basics about your customer's aspirations and needs. A lot of the innovation we do, um, if you wait for a survey result and the customer says, I want it, you're probably too late. So you've got to have the courage of creating value based on other instincts than just what a customer will tell you, because most customers can't really articulate what they want.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of courage here. So Tommy, you asked in the introduction to today's session, you said, what lessons are there for
Yes.
entrepreneurs? It does take a lot of courage, a whole lot of courage. And it takes a lot of work, it takes a lot of determination, a lot of belief in yourself and your team. It takes really good communications. You need to understand, believe whether or not what you're developing is inevitable, and that inevitability will deliver the value. And very, very importantly, a lot of, again, I'm dating myself a bit, but back when I went through engineering school, a lot of my classmates just couldn't wait to graduate because they could put their textbooks away and they wouldn't have to go to school anymore. People today, it's lifetime learning. It's not about
Yeah.
having a degree, it's about having the ability to learn, a passion for learning, and a willingness to continue to learn. Mentors, sometimes they get overplayed, but I do think mentors can help a whole lot. I have a daughter who's thinking about starting a business right now. And fortunately, I can mentor her, not just as a dad, but from my business experience. And I really, really sense she appreciates it, that it's not just because I'm her dad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so mentoring is important. I jotted down a few other notes. I think I mentioned this whole thing of thinking big, but starting small and learning fast. So really, if you have an idea that you think is appealing and you think you have a pathway through marketing to get 1,000 customers, think big about 1 million or 10 million customers. And what does that mean in terms of the motivation for where you're headed?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
And just kind of a side note, what you said about Aaron's headpiece, his Skynet evil scientist headpiece, but it does have one of a kind, very unique, very expensive pieces. You would both appreciate this. Ben Rich of Lockheed Martin Skunk Works used to say that kind of one of their pride points was they would take off the shelf things. So like
Mm-hmm.
the prototype for the F-117 Nighthawk, the Have Blue or Tacit Blue, they would take stuff out of fighter jets that they had just laying around.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not the piece made out of platinum and whatever. And it's like, no, we can strip something from an F-16. We can take it out of a B-52. And
Yeah.
that's the economically feasible point.
Yeah.
It's
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, even within Lockheed Martin, they had to sell their crazy ideas. They were like, "Why don't we just produce commercial jets?" And they had to go pitch the SR-71 Blackbird back when black and white TVs were a hot product. It's gonna fly Mach 3 at 85,000 feet. Hear me out. And it's like, what? But that's how they had to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. One other thing, I
Sure.
think the ultimate strategy is what I call design innovation focused on the total customer experience. So everything's a system. So you've got to look at this total customer experience, and you have to create innovative designs that your customers really find compelling, not
Mm-hmm.
just good, but compelling. And so you need that design innovation. You need technology innovation because any design innovation you have can be copied. So it's the technology innovation that makes our experience even more compelling, is your inherent competitive advantage. But you also need operational excellence. If you produce something that doesn't deliver on its brand promise, so let's say you're going to create an autonomous driving system and you're going to set up a transportation service like Uber without a driver, and you promise people you're going to pick them up in 3 minutes and you pick them up in 5, you're going to lose. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have the operational effectiveness or the car's dirty or something like that. So operational effectiveness may not be glamorous, but it's really, really, really important. And you think about all the things that have to be true for Delta Airlines to take off on time, drop me off safely, land on time safely, and my bags sync up with me and all of that stuff. That's operational excellence when airlines can begin to perform time and time again on schedule. Those are hard things. So you need all of that. You need design innovation, you need technology innovation, and you need operational effectiveness to be successful in your business, or your customers are going to walk. So um, I think those are the things I'd really share with the entrepreneur. And
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
it might sound trite, but never, 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 never give up.
Well,
It really takes a lot of courage and tenacity.
well, yeah. I mean, I beat that down a lot on people. Don't give up, and it does sound cheesy, but to me, it's if you give up, there's comfort in that because you have certainty that you failed. If you don't give up, you can say I've just failed so far, right?
Or you can say, I didn't fail, I just figured out something else that didn't work.
Didn't work. Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't.
I used to say that a lot.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've got one more thing that I know doesn't work,
yeah,
and
Yeah.
that's a great story.
yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't that scratch off. It was another one. Aaron.
Yeah. One thing I was going to say is that um, also, gosh, the thought is leaving me, but it was about giving up, and it's the fact that guys, keep going. The thought will come back to me.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Yeah.
you're fine. No, it's I was gonna say you do have when you have to show people how something works when they see it, it's and at the risk of sounding immature, because I am, as Dr. Burns is in a nice collared shirt and I'm in a neon blue hoodie.
Mhm.
It's but at the risk of sounding immature, it might not necessarily even be taking the CEO of GM in a self-driving car. It might be something like, oh, I don't have to have a car, I can call Uber. Well, what's the real thing? Everyone my age, it's, oh, we can get drunk and call an Uber.
Yes.
Well, when everyone goes out, I mean, the real kicker might be you don't have to call an Uber, your car takes you home.
Oh yeah.
And at the risk of sounding that might be what drives it.
Yeah.
Without question, it will drive some customers. Oh,
Yes.
there's one other lesson I wanted to
Sure.
leave on.
Yeah.
We should probably wrap up.
Sure.
You need to use the word "and," not you personally, but people need
Okay.
to think about the power of the word "and" versus the word "or."
Mhm.
And I think integrated thinking, the integrative mind, is really, really important. So the never-ending debate when I was heading R&D at General Motors is, should we do battery electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles? At the end of the day, it was an and. Both of them have electric motors. Both of them benefit from what I call skateboard chassis design. Both of them have power electronics, and one stores electrons, the other one stores hydrogen. But at the end of the day, they both drive electrically with zero emissions. And I wish I wouldn't have called the one a fuel cell, because it makes it sound so different from a battery. But a fuel cell is just a hydrogen battery. So this concept of the power of and is really, really important, I think, for entrepreneurs. Try to not prove I'm right, that it's A or B. Oftentimes A and B trump A or B. Trump
Yes.
in a card playing context. It's better than A or B. So I would say that's a real important life lesson. There was a writer named Roger Martin. He wrote a book called The Opposable Mind, and he studied successful CEOs versus less successful CEOs. And he found that the successful CEOs had an integrative mind, that they were able to connect these things in their mind and keep options in play by thinking in terms of and rather than or.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, the
Go ahead.
thought actually
Go
came
ahead,
back to me. I'm sorry about that. The thought actually came back to me. It was when you were talking about when we're talking about the concept of not giving up. It is. It sounds cliche, but it's not. It's there's a difference between knowing the right answer and then executing the right answer. And I feel like oftentimes with innovation, with entrepreneurship, you know the right answers. You know, oh, well, you shouldn't do this or you should try to do that. It's actually going through the process of trying to execute it. And
Oh man, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where the money is. That's where the big money gets spent. When you go to scale a business, that's where the big money gets spent. Not when you're doing Gen 1 rapid prototyping and stuff. It's why you need to think big, learn fast, and so that you can scale smart. And
mhm,
the real money that finance people, CFOs, worry about are the big capital expenditures and the big cash flows. And that is all about execution. There was a guy during the last Olympics, I think it was the one in Sochi, when the founder of Under Armour, um, they created a new speed skating suit for the speed skating team. Under Armour did. And the US speed skating team wasn't doing anywhere near as well as expected. So they wanted to blame it on these new speed skating suits. And this CEO of Under Armour basically said, brands are built in drops and lost in buckets. And I thought that was profound.
Wow.
That's why this execution is so darn important.
Yeah.
People remember a negative about an experience and tell their friends that way more often than they do when something goes well. So
That's a good
execution is
point.
really, really
yeah.
a key lesson for entrepreneurs.
That
Got to execute.
that's a good point. Yeah, on Amazon, I don't look at the positive reviews. I only read the negative ones. I see where it is.
Mhm.
But Dr. Burns, Aaron and I have kept you 5 minutes longer than we said we would. I blame that entirely on Aaron. And thank you so much for coming on my podcast again, sir. You're a brilliant individual. Your book, Autonomy, on Audible, I will put in the description as always. Aaron, I'll put Cogito Brains in there. Aaron, I will see you again. Dr. Burns, I hope to talk to you again one day. Thank you so much for coming. Do you have something to say?
Tommy, can we just talk a second after you take us off the video?
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, well, yeah, for everybody listening, you'll hear this when it's uploaded, and I'll
So we're
stop.
not recording now?
No, it's still recording. 1 second, and